Fantastic. So I think we'll just give it a second to let the attendees drop into the session. And once I see some numbers popping in, we'll get started, shall we? Fantastic. We have some people making their way in. Feel free to say hi in the chat, guys. Come and say hello, and we'll do our introductions and get the session going. Okay, fantastic. We have people coming in. Well, welcome this afternoon. I appreciate you spending time with us. My name's Nathan. I'm from the European Pain Federation, and I'm joined today by what will hopefully be 3 speakers. We have 2 currently with us, but I'm sure we're going to expand the group a little bit later today. They very, very kindly agreed to share some of their time and their insights into what the topic is going to be: the concepts, evidence, and application related to the fear of pain. I'll give them a chance just to introduce themselves in a moment. We're just going to go through a few points about the webinar. This is a recorded live Q&A session, which means that you're able to ask the speaker's questions, and there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the video feed right now, so you might just want to check that out. You can also ask questions anonymously, so feel free to get involved with the session. This is a great opportunity to ask questions directly to the speakers, and we'll have a chance to go through them all. If there's quite a lot of questions, we'll try and go through as many as possible. Excuse me. But the speakers would love to hear from you today, so please pop those in. If it's not specifically a question, but you have perhaps some comments, there is a chat function as well, so please feel free to use that and pop some comments in there if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. I think it's a really good opportunity since there's a few of you here. So Johan and Anne, if you have any questions or any points that you'd like to raise to each other to facilitate a discussion, that would be absolutely fantastic. I'm sure you've got quite a few burning thoughts and burning questions that would be fantastic to share. I think it's going to be a really, really good discussion. We've got a few questions planned, but again, guys, as the attendees, if you want to pop your questions in to the Q&A function, again, can be anonymous if you like, that would be absolutely brilliant. So in terms of getting started, should we have a few introductions? Perhaps we can have each speaker just introduce themselves and give us a little bit of an insight into your expertise and perhaps your research interests and clinical interests. Johan, welcome. Perhaps we can start with you. How are you doing today?
Sure, fine. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Johan Vlaaien. I'm a professor of health psychology and behavioral medicine at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, but also at the University of Leuven in Belgium, where I officially retired, but still involved in some of the project there. And actually, yeah, my research domain has been for a very long time chronic pain, and especially psychological mechanisms that might be responsible for this transition from an acute pain episode to chronic pain. As we all know, not everyone develops chronic pain. Actually, it's only a relatively smaller group, but still very large, epidemiologically seen. And of course, it's still not very clear who is developing chronic pain, who not. That's still a question of debate. But it seems like there are some hints, and so we have been looking at psychological mechanisms that might explain that transition. Mm-hmm. That's basically what I've been doing, and based off a link to that also is, if that's the case and fear plays a role, what can we do in terms of treatment?
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Katja, welcome. How are you doing? We're live on the webinar. Good to see you.
I'm stuck in traffic, but I'm only 5 minutes late, so
no problem at all. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going through some introductions, so you timed that absolutely perfect. We're going to go to Anne and then we'll come to yourself, if that's all right. Just do some introductions and then we'll get started with the discussion, if that's okay. Johan, welcome. Thank you so much for that. Anne, good to see you.
Hi. So I'm Anne Mulders. I'm an associate professor in Maastricht University, as well in the experimental health psychology group where Johan is working. And I also am still a visiting professor at the KU Leuven, not retired, but just visiting. So lots of overlap there. I have been working in the past years on indeed also psychological mechanisms that could be underlying the transition from acute to chronic pain. Worked a lot with Johan on that, and my specific focus has been on fear of pain and conditioning mechanisms in fear of pain. And in the recent years, it shifted more to avoidance behavior itself and the operant learning mechanisms that are involved in that. So I'm a bit of a learning psychologist or experimental psychologist interested in chronic pain.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And again, last but not least, Katja, welcome. How are you doing? Would you like to just introduce yourself a little bit? Let us know about your expertise and your interests.
Yes, Katja Boersma, originally from the Netherlands, but I have been living in Sweden and working in Sweden since about 23 years back. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work as a professor of psychology at the Örebro University. And I am interested in the mechanisms from acute pain to chronic pain from a psychological perspective. I've also focused by and large on the fear and avoidance model, but have also devoted quite a lot of my research to applying the model to clinical intervention, specifically exposure treatment and like some further developments of the exposure treatment model. So I do quite a bit of treatment research.
Fantastic. We've got a really good group here, covering everything. So I hope everybody's going to find this incredibly valuable. Thank you so much for your introductions. It's great to see you all. And again, thank you so much for spending some time with us on this afternoon out of your busy schedules. Again, before we get started, guys, attendees, there's a little bit of an instruction for our speakers. If you have any questions that they might be able to answer, feel free to please get those in. So perhaps we can start the discussion. Could we perhaps we can start with Johan, just going in the same order that we've kind of just gone in. Could you perhaps briefly explain the role of fear in the pain experience and give us perhaps a summary of the fear avoidance model? Again, for the attendees, this webinar is about the talks that are available on the EFIC Academy webinar platform. So if you could go and check those out after this, if you haven't watched them already, that would be really useful. But Johan, could you give us a bit of an introduction to that?
I can give a start, but I'm sure that Anne and Katja can probably expand from their point of view. But I think one of the more modern ways of looking at pain that it's actually considered, and that's for some people maybe kind of new information, more like a motivational, more like an emotion rather than a perceptual phenomenon, in the sense that, and there have been some very interesting papers making the analogy between pain with hunger and thirst rather than vision and audition or hearing, in the sense that it actually urges individuals to act. So pain is actually part of a motivational system to protect the body. And from that perspective, learning is very important, because when you only respond to injury, you're always too late. So you will always get into the trap. So one defensive mechanism is try to predict when it's going to be dangerous. And that is where fear comes in, because fear is an anticipatory emotion that helps you anticipate and also predict when it may get dangerous. And of course, then the question is, can we predict very well? Do we overpredict? Can we underpredict? So how does this work? And that's also where Anne's work and other people have been working well to better understand how this kind of fear learning is learning to predict. And then if you can predict, what to do about it. And then, of course, avoidance behavior comes in the picture. How all these defensive mechanisms, how they hold together, and how they can be seen as a kind of interacting system of elements. So in that sense, fear and pain are very closely tied together, and all in the sense of in the function of protecting the body.
Make it sound so simple. Make it sound so it's a complex
well
system.
It's far from simple, otherwise we would not be here and doing other things.
Absolutely. Anne, would you like to add to anything to that?
Yeah, I think Johan gave a very good summary about how we think about fear of pain at the moment. And also, I think it's important to see that fear is also very adaptive. It's not something that's always bad. We actually need it. It's good for survival. So in many ways, fear is actually good. And I think it's a challenge to find out when it becomes maladaptive and when it is no longer useful. And I think some of our work focused on that. So looking at when people are generalizing their fear to too many situations that are actually safe, for example, then of course that will limit your functioning. You will be avoiding a lot of things that are actually technically safe, and then that might lead to disability. So yeah, the balance between being afraid of what is really threatening and not being afraid and not avoiding things that are actually safe. I think that is one of the things that we have been investigating in the last few years.
Absolutely. And Katja, anything to add to that? Those fantastic explanations.
No, yeah, they're really good. So I have not much to add except for that from a clinical perspective. Then it also, of course, the question is how to explain to people how pain is a protective system and can in some instances become overprotective, and also then how to support people in changing their behavior in relation to this really powerful motivational drive to protect and maybe to avoid. So those are the clinical challenges that are that are connected to it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a little bit there about, it can be a benefit, this concept of fear, which does protect us in many situations. You can probably think of some straight away. With it having such a positive effect in the short term, comparing it to these long-term effects, it seems like when we have fear in the long term, it becomes maladaptive. What type of risk can we see from that in terms of, this long-term maladaptive fear, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's definitely had the link between fear and avoidance. So if you are afraid, but you're also starting to avoid a lot of things, an intrinsic problem with avoidance is, of course, that you don't get any confirmation back from your own behavior, in the sense that it's very difficult to find out whether it was actually necessary to avoid. So once you start avoiding certain things, it's actually being reinforced, because the things that you think that might have happened if you didn't do that behavior, they don't occur. But if you don't try out or test out your harm beliefs, let's say, then you won't find out whether that behavior was necessary or not. And then you can already see how this can spread and easily persist, because it's because you don't have any corrective feedback based on your own behavior anymore. So therefore, in the long run, if you keep on avoiding, it's very difficult to get out of that cycle, because to break it, you actually have to expose yourself or do something differently.
Is that Katja, and obviously everybody, this is a discussion for everybody, is that kind of what is usually seen clinically? Is this fear of certain activities, and that can be long term?
Yeah. And I think in addition to that is that people more generally become less active and avoid all whole classes of behaviors, maybe not be able to work anymore, so become more and more isolated. And the consequences of that psychologically is that people become depressed, get like low mood and worry about their future and so on. So those are like consequences that will add to the burden of the functional problems that are accompanied by them. Yeah, the fear of pain.
Anything to add to that, Johan?
That's I think it's totally in line with how we see the role of avoidance. There's maybe a small twist to it, and the question is, yeah, when is avoidance disabling, and when is avoidance functional? And there is a very simple approach to this relating to acute versus chronic. You could say, well, avoidance in the acute phase is probably adaptive, while when pain becomes chronic, then avoidance becomes maladaptive. That's a very crude way of looking at it. I think we're now starting to be more nuanced, and one of the more recent developments of one of these, many developments, but one of these developments that I find quite interesting is a more dynamic approach of avoidance behavior, where actually you don't see it as something that is functional in one phase of life or a phase in the trajectory, and then suddenly it becomes maladaptive, but more that avoidance is part of a way of balancing the use of existing knowledge and the exploration of novel ways of trying out new things, new movements, new activities. And that's irrespective, actually, of this trajectory, irrespective of the difference between acute versus chronic. And I must say, there is some very nice inspiration to be found in the animal literature, the animal behavior literature, where this kind of exploration, exploitation dilemma is being researched much more. And you can actually compare it with like foraging behavior and animals like birds and bumblebees. Sorry that I make this analogy, because you would never think that a pain researcher would think of the behavior of bumblebees. But actually, it's very similar in the sense that what they do is also when they're looking for food, they will, of course, they will find a patch that with lots of food, abundance of food. You would expect, okay, that's where they go until it's depleted, and then they look for something else. But that's not what they're doing. Actually, they will go there, but at the same time explore other patches as well before the first patch is being depleted. So it's kind of a balance between, okay, this is knowledge I know. For example, in pain, resting may be helpful. So I'm resting, but it might be also very functional to rest indeed, and to maybe to help the healing if there is if that's necessary. But it's also very functional at the same time to explore gradually what might be possible. And then it's what Anne just came to say, gives also the possibility to challenge and to check whether it's still necessary to just exploit the knowledge. So in that sense, it would be a different way of looking at avoidance, irrespective of acute, chronic, but more starting with maybe some exploitation and more exploration, and then back to stabilizing, consolidating what we have learned, and then exploiting that in daily life. But that's kind of a relatively new field in the pain literature. But it seems like it might be helpful to have a look at there, because there's so many analogies, and yeah, we can learn from other areas as well.
Yeah.
But that's maybe a small twist to the.
Yeah, but I think, like you and what you're saying is that within the psychology literature, at least the clinical psychology literature, there is like terms like flexibility or context sensitivity. I think that are quite in line with what you're saying. It's not the coping strategy as such that is either good or bad. It is dependent on the context, and it's dependent on the inflexibility or the ability to switch to different strategies. That is more important than so avoidance is neither good nor bad.
Yeah.
It depends on.
Yeah.
Yeah, depends on the individual, and I guess that might move us on to another point. Is how can clinicians identify that? How can they use tools to identify whether avoidance is becoming maladaptive in patients. I assume it's not a very, very simple process. Is there any perhaps tools or any evidence-based tools for clinicians to be able to use? Katja, I don't know if you want to jump into that one. That's the only thing with these types of discussions. You put one question out, we're not sure. But Katja, do you want to lead on that one?
Yeah, I can start. I think there's a large world of well-validated self-report measures that are available. Most of them translated and also psychometrically evaluated in several languages. That would get where you can get a sense of fear and avoidance beliefs, fear of pain, catastrophizing, which is a related concept. So yes, there is well-established self-report questionnaires. Then there's also I think behavioral tests that have been developed, where you've through a standardized procedure, patients may perform certain movements, and where you can observe and classify whether there is avoidance in the movement pattern, for example. There's also from Maastricht University a tool that has been also used across the world. It's called the photographs of daily activities, which is kind of an in-between observation and self-report. It's a batch of photographs of daily activities, a wide range of them that patients are asked to put on a kind of a thermometer, dependent on like how afraid they are to perform the activity that's depicted on the photograph. So yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Johan, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, maybe in addition to that, the question is always, well, how do you know when avoidance is not functional anymore? Could be also maybe related to the question. So, does the individual reach his valued life goals? So why, for example, what is important for you? For example, going to work or play with children. Why I'm not doing it? Well, I'm not doing it because I'm having pain. So, and then the question is, of course, what is it about pain that you will not be able to do these activities? And then often, then these beliefs about how pain is signaling some kind of some danger for the body comes up, and if that is in contrast with what we know from medical examination and so on, then it may be that that avoidance is an obstacle to reaching those goals. And then, of course, it's the next step would be then to explore, to challenge and test whether the theory that avoidance is necessary is correct or not. So using those tools that Katja just mentioned is a good start, and then you can move on and maybe more individually try and monitor what's really happening, what is really the core belief or the expectancies that play a role and that lead to the avoidance behavior.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it's all the standardized questionnaires and so have been very helpful, not in least in research, but also in clinical practice. But in the end, it is an individual's own story and own obstacles that you explore in an interview or in a clinical situation, and try to like get as good a picture as possible of how the person is experiencing their history with pain, and try and putting a puzzle together of why people are not functioning the way they want to.
It seems like this, always when we come to try and quantify these types of things, which is incredibly difficult and not so much useful in clinical practice as people might think. But in terms of standardizing these measurement tools, you've mentioned it there. My next question was going to be, are there any challenges to these measurement tools that we use? And again, moving into sort of individualized measures, you know, as a second stage, if you would like to put it, to make sure that, you know, we're focusing on the individual and their actions and their beliefs and their avoidance activities is really important, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's central, I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, actually, recently we actually had a paper where we describe a casus of a patient, indeed, where actually the ratings or the scores on some of these fear of pain questionnaires were relatively low if you look at the means. But it turned out, if you look closer and you also have an interview with that patient, that some of the items were scoring really high. So it was very clear that there were some type of movements that she was really very afraid of, and that she was very much avoiding. But if you would just look at the mean score, we would say this is not a patient with a high level of fear of pain, so she's not qualifying, for example, to go into exposure treatment. But if you look deeper, then it turned out, well, there was actually, definitely something that you could work on in an exposure treatment. So yeah, like Katja already said, I think a clinical, more in-depth interview is really necessary if you want to stratify patients to a different to a treatment or see what they can be helped with.
Absolutely. Just a quick message to the attendees again. Feel free to ask questions. You have the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can also do this anonymously if you would like to pop the question in. I think some of us like to do that now and again, is just pop an anonymous question in there. So feel free to do that as well. Just moving on slightly, again, please feel free to bring up any topics that you see relevant to the discussion. Mentioned there a few things about exposure treatment. Could you perhaps maybe start to dwell on what types of things clinicians can perhaps do to address fear avoidance behaviors? Katja, do you want to start with this one? We know that you work clinically.
Yeah, I actually learned my doing exposure therapy from Johan and his team in Maastricht about 15-20 years ago. Yeah, so like exposure treatment is a way to address avoidance, fear and avoidance. It's like the idea is to create situations or that will provide an opportunity for patients to learn new things about what will happen. So as Johan said in the beginning, the driving motivation is to try and predict the future and avoid an outcome. In this case, for example, more pain or a lot of problems due to the pain and so on. So we will try and create a situation in certain in activities that the patient is avoiding, where the patients may be able to learn that what they fear will happen does not happen. So you can call that an exposure, and you can also call it a behavioral experiment if you have a very specific prediction sometimes of if I will bend, this will happen, etc., etc. So that is what we do, and of course we do that in a very systematic way and very based on the types of movements and activities that patients avoid. So it's very personalized, I would say.
Absolutely. And Johan, anything to add to that one?
I just want to add that, Katja, you're probably doing it much better now than we did it 20 years ago. So don't. There's been a lot of development since then, and I like to see exposure as a scientific experiment almost, but then in a clinical setting with an individual, just to test several hypotheses and see, okay, what is the hypothesis that makes sense, and what is the hypothesis that maybe we need to abandon. And again, that requires, as you said, flexibility. I would say also it requires the willingness to explore new things, and that initially that may be frightening, but the results are really sometimes very, 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 I must say, dramatic, that people discover, which is not always it's very mixed emotions often when they discover they've been avoiding actually without a real necessity. Sometimes it's also very sad to discover that, actually. Yeah? But I think it's a very creative and very, I must say, rewarding way of providing a treatment.
And it's very practical. That is to say,
concrete.
So it's about biking with people. It's about like putting on high heels and walking down like a stairs, or the wobbly stones outside that are uneven. It's about playing football or walking the dogs. Very concrete exposure to doing that, also together with patients.
Yeah. There's maybe one thing I would like to ask to Katja, and maybe also to Anne. So what do you do with the, because that was one of the difficult things years ago, is what do you do when you observe these subtle safety behaviors that people are usually not really aware of, that they do that? Are you pointing to these? Are you making them aware that they may be doing things, but then in a way that is maybe not the most ergonomic or the most functional, or how are you doing this? It would be nice to hear about that.
You want to go first, Anne?
No, I think this is your cup of tea. I have no clinical experience whatsoever.
So I think here, I mean, these are also about clinical strategies, and partly also about like theoretical mechanisms. Like sometimes I don't know if it's necessary, but from a clinical perspective, we do work with this. So we start with also very maybe more controlled exposure in like where we separate movements, for example. Bending or twisting the body, or stretching or lifting, so we focus on those, and then like we do observe whether we see what you call what we think are avoidance behaviors, like keeping the breath, or like tensing the body, or bending only in a very specific way that maybe people have learned. And then we do start a conversation about like whether people are aware of it and whether they're willing to try to do it in a different way. So it's also there, I think, you want exploring whether movements can be performed in different ways. And many times people are not aware that they have these subtle protective behaviors, if you so will. So yeah, we do and explicitly incorporate that. Yeah.
Okay.
And then also in the end, so when performing movements, I think there's different theories or ideas about what is the good way to perform movements. But in our perspective, it's about flexibility, is being able to do it in different ways. So that's one thing that we kind of strive after. That if you lift, you can do it in different ways, the right way, the wrong way. And then the idea is that you be able to discover that both ways are possible.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And we've mentioned a few times about this willingness and readiness for information from people who are expressing these types of things. Is it really important for people to be willing to take on this information when you're providing graded exposure? I assume it's usually combined with some form of education, whether it be pain science education, or if there's no formal sort of label to it. Do clinicians need to assess sort of a readiness for information and whether they're going to take that information on in clinical practice? Katja, perhaps?
Well, I think we have a little bit of a different take on the readiness for change concept, and that is that given that the protective drive is so incorporated in our beings, I think we kind of have the point of departure that it's also very natural to not be very open or to confronting this, not at least also because people many times have long histories of failed treatments, disappointments in healthcare, and so on. So we kind of have the point of departure that it's part of the treatment to try and together explore how chronic pain is working for that person. So for us, not like if you would say this concept of readiness to change, many people are not there, and that's not a problem, but it is something that needs to be addressed together with the patient. So through like techniques or so communication approaches such as validation and trying to really get like a joint approach to the treatment. Yeah.
It's key. Yeah. And Johan, any comments on that?
Well, it's a good point actually. The awareness of the readiness, but and I'm not sure that it's really something that you have to explicitly measure. I remember when I was still doing clinical work, but it's a long time ago again. But the first question that we ask is, why are you here? What do you want? Now, most individuals would say, well, get rid of the pain, of course. I'm here, this is a pain clinic, isn't it? And then, so the next thing would then, of course, yeah, validating, of course, yes, that's, of course, you would like to get rid of it. But then the next question was, what else? And then a lot of individuals are a little astonished to say, what do you mean by what else? Yeah, what is there something else that you would like to achieve rather than get rid of the pain? And that is a point where actually you try to establish some of the individual goals. And that is not something that is for everyone ready there. So it may take a little bit of time to, again, to explore, but also to define what is a valued life, a goal for someone. Because, and if you find some, and everyone, of course, has a valued life goal, that makes the treatment, of course, a lot easier, because then you have something to try and reach. And then you can look at the balance between the value of that goal versus the value of not doing it, and maybe preserving or reducing pain, which is unsure.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think from like a dichotomous idea of that either people are ready to change or they're not, I think there's another perspective that within each individual, all of us, there is a desire for change, but also an ambivalence for change. We want to conserve what we have. So I think ambivalence is inherent to all of us when it comes to change. So, and I think that perspective gives some opens up for like not presenting a solution to somebody that they might then reject.
And any thoughts on that?
No, I think they covered most of the thoughts that I had already. Yeah, no. So
fantastic stuff. Fantastic. So a couple more questions. Again, guys in the attendees, feel free to get your questions in. If there's a few that kind of come pouring in, we'll try and answer as many as possible now. So with regards to research and perhaps clinical practice, we might have mentioned a few already, but what do you see as the biggest challenges of course, both clinically and within sort of the research capacity to providing optimal support for those with fear of pain and perhaps fear avoidance beliefs? What are the biggest challenges to that? Perhaps Johan, you would like to start with this one?
It's a big question, Nathan.
It is.
Well, I see several, but I think one big question for pain treatment is, I think, and a challenge, how to translate our knowledge base that is actually based on RCTs, many generations of RCTs, how to use that knowledge base, how to translate it into individual care. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And we have to be honest that the effect sizes of most of the RCTs are not that huge. So all the RCTs that we've been doing show very moderate effect sizes. That means that there's a lot of heterogeneity, and that means also that you cannot just generalize from that group mean effect to the next individual, because you don't know whether that individual matches that mean. And sometimes you see in these group RCTs testing psychological treatments, including exposure, sometimes you don't find any individual in that group that matches this mean. The mean is often kind of a virtual value that is not there. And so that is a challenge, because that makes it uncertain whether the treatment that is being tested in the RCT is going to work in the same way in the next individual. So this requires a different approach, I think, and that may take some time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And any thoughts to perhaps the challenges that you see in this area?
Yeah, still a lot of challenges indeed. It's a lot of work to be done. There's already a lot of progress made as well, but I think in research itself, and I think we've already been hinting a bit to it as well. I think the shift from investigating fear of pain as being a more like passive construct, looking at verbal reports or arousal measures, going more into that behavioral component, the avoidance behavior itself, because I think in the recent years, quite some research has shown that there is not just a one-to-one relationship between fear and avoidance. And I think from earlier conceptualizations of avoidance behavior, we studied fear also as a proxy for avoidance behavior, but that does not seem to hold. And it's actually, it makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because we are human beings, and we are living in this this world where we have indeed also other goals. So it's not only to make sure that we don't get injured or that we don't feel pain, but it's also we're striving for other things. These motivations or these other goals, they can compete with the goal to prevent pain from occurring, for example. And some of the research that we've done in the recent years shows indeed that in healthy participants, this relationship between fear and avoidance can be quite separated, definitely when the avoidance becomes very costly, or when there is more need to explore and to see whether this is the best way to go forward. And we see that in psychopathology and also in chronic pain, because there has been a lot of more work done already in anxiety disorders. We see that this relationship between fear and avoidance is stronger. So the question now is how to also loosen this relationship in patients and scrutinize why actually, even when avoidance is costly, this relation stays so tight in patients. So I think that is a huge challenge that we are still up for.
Absolutely, and I guess the list goes on. And I appreciate you guys picking out some specific examples there. And Katja, any thoughts to the challenges?
Well, like I'm thinking, my mind goes to some more of the applied challenges, and that is one is education. And I think you guys are doing a good job. But the education, also basic education of the doctors and physiotherapists and psychologists working in primary care contexts, etc. How to educate or train clinicians in doing exposure. Those are challenges.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what are you guys? I was going to say, what are you guys up to nowadays? What type of research are you involved in? Are you involved in any? And you mentioned there that you're involved in in healthy subjects, looking at some research to try and address those challenges. Are you involved with any more research in this field? Anything that we can expect to see sometime soon?
Yeah, well, another challenge, or I think an area that has not been investigated a lot is the social context of pain, but also where learning about pain is occurring. We are again a social species, so we do not only we don't feel pain alone. We communicate about pain with our facial expressions, with our the words we use when we feel pain. We observe others in pain, and we can also learn fear of pain from them. that we don't have to directly experience it. And that might also open up some avenues maybe for treatment, maybe also observing somebody who is exposing themselves to something that they are afraid of. Maybe that can also have indirect beneficial effects for patients. So I think this entire social learning and observational learning of fear of pain and avoidance is still very important. And this is something that we are exploring at the moment, and also looking at the role of social support potentially in exposure treatments. But then, the exposure analogs in the lab, so that's like an extinction procedure. So yeah, we are working on that as well at the moment.
Amazing. And Johan, I assume in a sort of similar area, what are you involved in with regards to this area at the moment?
Well, something that I mentioned earlier was the approaching or looking at this avoidance behavior from the lens of, and it's more kind of an evolutionary perspective, the lens of the exploration versus exploitation dilemma, and how people resolve this dilemma, because it's a dilemma in the sense that if you exploit the things that you already know and you keep on, then you may miss out of other interesting solutions to your problem. But if you explore too much, you can also have, you maybe spend too much energy in things that are not worthwhile. So, and how to solve this dilemma is something that we don't know much about in the area of pain. Some other researchers have also embarked on this topic, and I think it may help to better understand how avoidance behavior can be mitigated when it's not functional anymore. But that's a line of research that we're currently looking at.
Amazing, super interesting. And Katja, how are you getting involved with things clinically? Perhaps any thoughts?
Yeah, well, we just finished an implementation project where we have attempted to educate clinicians in doing exposure treatment. And we've kind of, in the last 5 to 10 years, we focused on a subgroup of patients who also have mental health disorders, so comorbidity between chronic pain and mental health disorders. For that population of patients, we've further developed exposure treatment, and now we've tried to educate clinicians, and they have treated patients in their own clinics, whether it's in primary care, secondary care, and we're writing that up, mainly looking at effectiveness when the treatment is performed by real clinicians in the real world, as well as more obstacles to implementation. So a little bit different questions, you could say, trying to get at what is necessary for this treatment to work in real practice. Mm-hmm. So that's one of our main projects that we're finishing up right now.
Absolutely fantastic. It's great to hear. It's great to hear, and hopefully that's of some interest to the attendees. Johan, thank you so much for popping a little answer to the question in the Q&A. I'll just pop it to the group. So someone asked, how would you work with reducing fear avoidance on a group level, perhaps? And this pays attention to the social aspect that you were talking about there. Do you know of any techniques and things to be aware of when you're looking to reduce fear avoidance in the social setting, in a group setting?
Yeah, well, there are, of course, probably lots of different group dynamics going on. So it's a little bit difficult maybe to, I have no experience with doing it myself, so I'm gonna be I'm gonna watch out what I say here. But what I do think is more so I think they can definitely learn from each other. But like I say, I would also first want to look into these mechanisms in the lab and see how it works. Also, it will probably depend on the group dynamics. Do people identify with others? Because if you think, okay, but I have a weak and a feeble body, so yeah, this other person who also has chronic pain, but he's like a strong, construction worker, and he has an injury now, but of course he can do this exercise, but I still cannot do it. Then yeah, it doesn't mean because we're all patients with a pain problem that we identify with each other. So I think the identifying yourself then with the other members of the group is probably important to have these beneficial effects of doing the exercises together. And I'm also thinking more in social support kind of way. I think just having other people to talk about, having maybe some support to help you overcome your fear and do it, I think that can be reinforcing as well. And then also, more specific social support. We're looking now at whether really you're, the person that you receive the most support from in a daily context, so not some other patients or caregivers, whether that could have an additional beneficial effect during treatment. But yeah, like I say, we're doing the lab work now, so it will take a few more years to say anything about that. But I would love to hear Katja's suggestions about that as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, of course, trying to individualize and make things specific to a certain person's situation and behavior, that kind of is not quite in line with doing things in groups where you're more on a general level. But at the same time, I think many of the aspects that prepare for exposure are done very well in groups, like education about pain, sharing of experiences, and also, and in the end, I think when you could come to generalizing behaviors to, for example, start training and to go out and do things, that doing that in a group works really well, and I think is part and parcel of many rehabilitation programs is to use groups in this way.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And Johan, thank you so much for your comment. Would you like to expand on anything that you've replied there?
I think it certainly is possible, and the things that Anne and Katja already said are really useful to keep in mind. I think one of the challenges might be in the group is that these most subtle safety behaviors are very different for each individual. And it might be a challenge to keep an eye on all these different ones when you have a group of people before you. But that does not mean that it's not possible. And there are also advantages of having people, because people can learn from each other. They can learn, of course, that they can learn. Hopefully they will not learn to become more afraid to see other individuals suffering, but they also can learn to be reassured and to see that when other people make nice progress, that it's possible, and that might be a nice model for them as well to progress and to continue.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I love the idea, you know, and I think it has its uses, and like you guys have mentioned so very, very, very clearly there's some opportunities, and perhaps there are some risks to this form of delivery, but hopefully the research in the future can show us you know, where the role for this social approach might lie in addressing fear avoidance. Thank you so much for your questions, guys. We're coming towards the end of our allotted time. I'm sure we could continue further with the discussions, but perhaps we could have maybe some key takeaways from each of the speakers today, something that you perhaps want the attendees to go away with, some maybe a key point. Perhaps, Anne, do you want to start with perhaps a key point that you would like to get across from today's talk?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, I think more attention is needed for behavior in itself. So avoidance behavior, not only looking at fear, because I think fear is not, or should not be the endpoint of the treatment. You should get people active again. They should be able to live their lives to their best doing. So I think that is really important. Although earlier models have focused on this fear based on it being the sole motivator for avoidance behavior, but it's probably not. So let's look at avoidance behavior if you want to change pain-related disability.
Fantastic. And Katja, any final thoughts?
No, I can try and hook onto that. And then also, if we look at avoidance behavior, then we can keep in mind what we started out by saying is that it's not an either or, that all avoidance behavior is bad, but to keep in mind that it's dependent on context and purpose. and flexibility, maybe in the end.
Fantastic. And Johan, any final comments for everybody here today?
Yeah, I had a very similar one in the sense that avoidance is not necessarily maladaptive. So we have to be careful that if we see avoidance behavior, not immediately think, oh, that's something that needs to be abolished. It's more about the balance between maybe not doing things and trying out things. So I think that's a kind of maybe a main message that I think is characterizing the way we are now moving towards.
I think that'll be very useful for people. Certainly before today's talk, I would associate with avoidance behavior as usually being maladaptive. But the conversation we've had today is that it's important to recognize when it might be adaptive and might be useful, and to address it and recognize that, you know, in an appropriate way, as difficult as it might be, you know. We do have one more question just before we finish. Ahmed says, when the cause of pain is unknown, will this make a difference in the way of dealing with it, perhaps from the cause of pain with regards to avoidance behavior? Any comments? Any comments to those? I'll let it be a free for all. Any comments to that one?
Maybe not a question.
Yeah.
Is that not the case of many problems of chronic pain, that the cause of the pain is unknown? I think many clinicians would admit that they don't know exactly where the cause of the pain is. So probably what Ahmed is referring to, but please correct me, is maybe what to do when there are some red flags. Maybe if the triage shows that there is indeed something that can be pointed, like a fracture or a tumor or an inflammation or whatever, does everything that we told about fear and avoidance, does it also hold for these kind of situations where there are really red flags present? So maybe Katja has thought about that as well.
I guess perhaps it's a comment towards, you know, maybe the simple answer would be yes. You know, it does make a difference in when we don't know what the cause of the pain is unknown. Perhaps, yeah, Katja, do you want to?
No, I don't have anything
to. Well, hopefully we've gone towards to answering your question there, Ahmed. And again, I think it might be more of a comment. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a very important point, because this is exactly what patients will come with, of course, is the cause of my pain is unknown. Is it therefore safe or unsafe to move? So it's a central issue to address, but it does have to do with how we conceptualize chronic pain in general. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. It's a great comment to end the whole of the talk. But yeah, thank you so much for your questions, attendees. I really appreciate that. And Johan, Katja, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really valuable. Hopefully the attendees have found it super valuable as well. Obviously, we mentioned earlier that this Q&A session is recorded, so you'll be able to find it on the EFIC educational platform at a later date if you didn't manage to catch it today. And you will also find a link in the invitation email that you received that should take you there as well. If not, search the EFIC website and it'll be on there as well. So again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Again, speakers, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I wish you a fantastic rest of your day, everybody. I'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, for moderating this so well.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.